One of the challenges that faces people with autism, Asperger's syndrome, as it used to be called, or high functioning autism, is what is called emotional dysregulation, and that is our emotions are not well regulated because we don't have the outlet available to us to deal with things that attack our emotions. So what do? Well, we respond emotionally. Now, a good way to portray this is, let's say that you have a loved one in your family who dies, somebody that you were very near and dear to, and you have an emotional response. Well, that's not logical, right? But it's acceptable and it's understandable. So you have this emotional response, a time when your emotion overrides reasoning. That should happen. I mean, this is totally normal. But what happens when that happens all the time? Well, what happens is basically you, as a person who is autistic, seem to live in a perpetual state of emotional dysregulation. And I believe this is just me. This is my hypothesis. It's not something that I read somewhere, but just my hypothesis that one of the reasons that people with autism are depressed, and sometimes, I hate to say because you get dinged by YouTube when you say that, is because we don't have any alternative. We can't talk to people. I mean, literally, we cannot talk to people. When we try to talk to people, they don't want to listen to us because they pick up on some of the brain scrambling, we talked about before. We don't know we have mind blindness. We don't have the ability to talk to people like neurotypical people do. And when you don't have that outlet, when you can't respond rationally or reasonably, you have no alternative than to respond emotionally. So that is emotional dysregulation. It occurs when your emotions control your reasoning, or I should say your emotions. Emotions take control instead of your reasoning. Let me just read you a sentence from WebMD.com. And I could bore you with a couple paragraphs here. I'm not going to do that. I just want to read a sentence to you. And it says, emotional dysregulation is a term used to describe an emotional response that is poorly regulated and does not fall within the traditionally accepted range of emotional reaction. And then it goes on to say it may also be referred to as a marked fluctuation of mood swings, or labile. That simply means unstable mood. So your mood is unstable, and people will look at you and they will say, this person is very unstable. What is going on with this individual? What's going on with this individual is this person cannot communicate. So they cannot apply reason. They can't sit down and reason with somebody. They have no one to talk to. Maybe you could pay somebody, a therapist, and that's a good idea if you can afford it. But you can't live your entire life in a therapist's office, right? So how do you respond? How do you react? You do so emotionally because that's the only avenue available. Reason is not there. And when you try to apply reason says, yeah, you need to talk about this. And your emotions say, I can't talk about it, because you can't talk about it. So you become frustrated. Are you following me so far? All right. So we're talking about emotional dysregulation. Let's talk about 6 aspects of that we need to understand as people with autism. Number 1 is resolving issues is something that we should be doing rather than responding emotionally. But again, as we already pointed out, responding rationally is not something that is necessarily always available to us. So what do? Well, sometimes we'll close up, sometimes we'll have temper tantrums, less likely. For me, I just want to get away, and, because, it hurts. You want to do something that will solve the hurting or make the hurt go away. Some people will turn to drugs or alcohol, self-medicate or other medications. Some people with autism may sleep all the time, because you're not really upset when you're asleep. Some people are. They wake up and they're not refreshed, and during their sleeping session, I was going to say during the night, but it's not necessarily nighttime. During their sleeping session, they were still depressed. They even in their sleep they felt depressed, or they would have dreams that would bring up what is at the core of their thinking. So, what is at the heart of a narcissist is this emotional dysregulation where they are responding emotionally rather than rationally. Number two is they tend to have a skewed perception of reality, at least in their way of expressing it. So that doesn't mean necessarily that their analysis of what is going on, that somebody hurt them or there was a very bad experience, that didn't really happen, but their response to that reality is not what typical neurotypical people would do. Neurotypical people are much better equipped, it seems, at handling those emotionally stressful situations and circumstances. So, number three, we tend to be a little more temperamental. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't seem to have a serious anger problem. I don't throw hissy fits. I don't go into a rage. I don't yell at people. I wish I were better at that, but that's one of, it could be true of you too, but it's not something that's really strong with me. But, I just have to get away. I got to back away from people. I have to get in my quiet space, so to speak. I need to get out in the woods where there are no woods, so it's in my mind. I just try to get away in my mind, and please don't talk to me because I'm here all alone. Where's that voice coming from? What are they even talking about? Number four is what is called, I call it rigid thinking, but I think the clinical term is imperative thinking. That is where it has to be my way. And that is understandable because sometimes your way is the correct way, you just can't express it. Other people don't understand why you need it done your way because they can't talk to you, because you can't express yourself adequately, even if you could talk to them. So they see you wanting it your way, which is kind of typical of narcissists, So they think, you're just being narcissistic. You're being kind of arrogant, demanding to have your own way, where really your own way is perfectly logical. And they would agree with you if they knew why you were thinking the way you were thinking, but you can't express that to them. Number five is sometimes we will respond by projecting blame. That's never a good thing, in my opinion. It's when we retreat into fanciful thinking or fantasy thinking that we imagine the world very different from what it is. So a good example of that is, say that you have a little kid who is being abused, and there's somebody who is abusing him or her, and no one is doing anything about it. They are kind of ashamed because they don't want to admit that they are so weak that they are being abused. And what do? Well, they create a fantasy world to escape. Now, an adult, you may say, hey, look, this person is abusing me. This person is very abusive. And people will say, no, they're not. I know this person. They're very sweet. They're friendly. They don't know that they're dealing not with a person, but with a mask this person is wearing. So even after you express that you're having a problem as an adult with autism, other people will respond incorrectly. But your thinking seems to them to be very rigid and very imperative because you know what you experienced. This person or these people or this group of people were very abusive to you. This is something that neurotypical people just don't experience, at least on the level that you are experiencing it with. I remember listening one time to James Dobson, the psychiatrist. I don't know if he still has a radio show or not, but he talked about having this very traumatic experience when he was on a field trip with his class, and he was on a bus, and he was all alone amongst all these kids, and how he felt very bad. And then he stopped and he thought about it as he was doing his radio show and explaining this. And he was musing about how it is that some kids live their entire lives like that and how difficult it must be for them. And how they can, he didn't say this, but how they can create a fantasy world and project blame on others. And then they can be very rigid in their thinking, and other people don't understand it because other people don't go through it. So it seems like this kid, if he tries to explain what he's going through, seems to be illogical, very rigid thinking, very imperative in his thinking processes, where yeah, of course he is, because he's telling the truth. And one of the things about people with autism, and there are exceptions to this, is we tend to be very truthful, very honest. And when we are able to overcome mind blindness and talk to people and say, look, this is an abusive situation. I need your backup. I need your support. I need you to get behind me. I need a shoulder to cry on, or at least a shoulder to lean on, or something. I need to know somebody has got my back. And the person says, you're just exaggerating. You know, you're blowing this all out of proportion. This is not an abusive person. This person just doesn't have a filter. They use those dumb excuses. When in reality, what they are looking at is not the real person or the real people who abused you, but they're looking at the mask those people are wearing. You know, the sweet, kind, happy, cheerful individual who puts on that when they need to and when they don't need it, or they want to hurt somebody. And people with autism are easy targets. What do? You know, you try to explain it and they don't buy it. Well, what happens is, at least this has been my experience, you have no option. I mean, keep in mind the two things are reason and emotion. And when reason is taken away from you, you've tried that. You've tried it. And reason is taken away from you, what's left? Well, emotion. That's all you can do. So we have this imperative or rigid thinking. We have this thing where we project blame. You know, we slip into this fantasy world that we talked about. And then there is what is called displacement, and that is where we may take out our frustrations on other people. But with a person with autism, it's more likely that they will take out their frustrations on themselves. This is, I don't want to use the word because this is where YouTube will ding your video. So I'm not going to say that word, pretend you didn't hear it, and hopefully it went past the screeners at YouTube. But number 6, displacement. You can't resolve the problem. Nobody will listen to you. When they do listen to you, they don't believe you. They think you're being rigid or imperative in your thinking. So it's time to take out the frustrations on yourself. That's not logical, but logic has been taken away from you. You have no reasoning. Reasoning simply is, it's not accessible. You know, it's not an option. So we have 6 things. Number 1 is resolving issues should be there rather than responding emotionally, but sometimes responding emotionally is not there. So, resolving issues is not there, so we must respond emotionally. Number 2 is we have the skewed sense of reality, at least in the sense or from the perception of neurotypical people. Number 3, we become temperamental, and usually that is expressed as depression rather than anger, not always. Number 4, we are very imperative. From the perception, again, of neurotypical people, we are very imperative and rigid in our thinking, which, by the way, is a trait of most people with autism, because we love the truth, and we're not going to sway from it. We know what reality is, and we're not going to pretend up is down or down is up when we know exactly what it is. We don't care. Remember the Asch experiment we talked about, I think, in another video a day or two ago? You know, the short line is a short line, and this person is a narcissist. They're not just a sweet person who has doesn't have a filter, or whatever people say about them. Number 5 is we tend to project blame. And number 6 is displacement, where without access to logic or reasoning, we take out our frustration elsewhere. Sometimes, too often, that is taken out on ourselves. 2 rectangles on the screen if you want to keep on talking. All you got to do is click one of those 2 rectangles and our conversation will continue. If not, thanks for stopping by. And we'll see y'all next time.